My name is Cyrus Worrells, and I'm Director of Programs at the Institute for Spirituality and Health. And I just want to welcome you, whether you've been with us in the past or this is your first time joining. Thank you for being here. Thanks for engaging with us. We're a 65-year-old nonprofit organization in the Texas Medical Center dedicated to enhancing well-being by exploring the relationship between spirituality and health in all of the ways that that connection shows up, in all of the ways that human beings find spirituality, find connection and meaning in their lives, and all the ways that we consider health, what it means to be healthy and well. And we have been delighted to be partnered with Saybrook University for the last few years, and through that connection have met Dr. Jeremiah Piercy, who's really brought a lot to our organization and has really brought a really unique experiential program for Black History Month. So I think, as Dr. Piercy touched on, it's been a crazy week for any of us in Houston. And as I've learned, traumas and difficult experiences can often open us up to a greater sense of empathy and compassion. And so in many ways, perhaps the hardships that some of us have faced this week can allow us to dive more fully into an empathic experience of hardships, challenges that Jeremiah will lead us through in Black history. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Piercy, who is a doctor of cognitive psychology, has a lot of experience working in facilitating relaxing experiences, stress-reducing experiences for all kinds of populations. He's a military veteran, really brilliant guy, and we're so happy to have him as the newest member of our ISH staff. And so again, I want to welcome you all. And Dr. Jeremiah Piercy, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, thank you all again for showing up for part 3 of Black History. And as I mentioned earlier, this is really going to span about 50 years in length. And there are many significant things that occurred between 1940 and 1990. And it's difficult to shrink it into a sizable portion that's easily digestible. So I wanted to touch on the theme of how these past events relate to current events that are occurring and what led up to the 2020 civil rights movement. So without further ado, we can start somewhere around the 1940s. And we'll start with a couple of quotes. "If you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing." Malcolm X. 300 years of humiliation, abuse, and deprivation cannot be expected to find voice in a whisper. Martin Luther King Jr. And the Civil Rights Act, which seemingly a landmark piece of legislation, was actually a paper tiger that had no ability to protect the right to vote. The act did create the Civil Rights Commission, upgrade the Department of Justice's section on civil rights to a division, and authorize the U.S. Attorney General to sue those violating the voting rights of American citizens. But it was, by design and implementation, no match for the entrenched resistance to Black citizenship. Carol Anderson. So as we begin this session, you can go ahead and turn your cameras off now if you have them on. Find a nice comfortable spot if you haven't already. And if you are laying in that comfortable spot, then just go ahead and make yourself more comfortable. Whatever that may be, grab a blanket, grab an extra pillow, find a place where you can really relax. And in relaxing, it will help you to really see, visualize, and experience this event. And so we'll begin this one with the same kind of relaxation technique to help you get more relaxed and to just help facilitate this guided meditation. And so, as you lie there, you can just visualize yourself standing at the top of a staircase. Now, I don't know what kind of staircase this may be for you, and it, quite frankly, really doesn't matter. But whatever kind of staircase it is, whether it's one made of an ornate marble, something that you would find in the fanciest hotels, lobbies, event centers, or maybe it's something more common. Perhaps it's a metal staircase. Maybe it's even a wood staircase, one that's rickety, maybe even shaky as you go down. It doesn't really matter what kind of staircase it is, but as you begin to walk down the stairs, in your mind, taking one step after the other, perhaps even noticing what it would feel like to stand on these stairs. Maybe noticing the texture against your feet, smooth, rough, maybe even a little pokey. And as you continue down the stairs, just allow yourself to feel more and more relaxed with each stair that you go down. Begin to feel the muscles in your upper body especially to just kind of fade away. All the tension fading away as you relax more and more with each breath. And then continue down the stairs. Maybe even noticing your hand against the handrail. Maybe there are people around you, or maybe there's no one in sight. And as you walk down the stairs, maybe running your fingers along the handrail, noticing the different designs or textures beneath each fingertip, noticing them on the pointer finger, the middle finger, and the thumb especially. Feeling those textures. And then noticing your feet once more and the textures you might feel there. And with each step down the stairs, it can feel as if you have a place to be. Something meaningful is about to happen and you're on your way. Maybe you're going down the stairs to an incredible event. Or maybe you're just walking down the stairs into your living room. Wherever you're going, though, this sort of twinge of excitement, just allow that to sit for a moment. The excitement of perhaps not quite knowing what you're about to experience. Or maybe it's more of an excitement of feeling relaxed, of letting go, of having nothing else to do at this moment other than to relax and feel good with each step, whatever the case may be for you. Just let any good feelings begin to expand and grow. Maybe they begin in your chest, and you can feel that good, positive energy, the excitement, spreading from the chest, down the arms, feeling all the muscles relax as you do, down to the very ends of the fingers. Maybe even noticing the fingertips. And then feeling it move down the legs, and just letting the legs relax. And even though you may be standing or even walking down the staircase, you can feel more relaxed still. And then as this moves down your legs to the very ends of the toes, just begin to notice perhaps how much more relaxed you feel now than you did just a moment ago. Maybe you feel very relaxed. And as you get closer and closer to the bottom of the staircase, just let these sensations rest on your mind. The good, the relaxing, the positive sensations that will help you feel better and better with each step. Feel more and more relaxed. And as you get closer and closer to the bottom of the stairs, just know that even though you may feel very relaxed, your mind will stay alert and awake so that you can experience the full session and perhaps come away with something powerful and meaningful for you. And so as you reach the bottom of the stairs, perhaps looking out before you, maybe there are many people, maybe there's just one. And maybe that one person is your spouse, your partner, girlfriend, boyfriend, whomever it may be. And as you look at this individual, you may notice that they are sad to an extent. Sad that it is now 1941 and they've been called to duty. Pearl Harbor was bombed December of 1941, and the US responds. And so maybe you embrace shortly, and maybe you can feel their lips on your lips, feeling the sensations move across. And then as you let go of the embrace, knowing that that person may not come back, but always hoping, as humans do, for the best. And then this individual leaves the city of Tuskegee and enters the service. And it's interesting just how many people went through this very scenario. And maybe you even know a few people that have. During World War II, more than 2.5 million African Americans, nearly 20% of the entire African American population, registered in the draft. And so, this new life that was only just beginning to become modern, the segregation found itself even to the ranks of the military once more, where blacks and whites were separated, with blacks not even having the ability to fly their own planes. But by 1946, after protests, 992 pilots were trained, flew hundreds of missions in Southern Europe. They were nicknamed the Red Tails. Maybe that person was somebody that was in one of those planes. Overall, the Red Tails lost 66 men and flew more than 15,000 missions from 1943 to 1945. But despite this, despite their willingness to sacrifice for the country, there were still problems with the culture. African Americans, especially men, were thought to have been uniquely fit for enslavement due to their physical strength and simple minds. In fact, people argued that slaves possessed more primitive nervous systems and so did not experience pain as white people did. Even scientific and medical authorities through the early 20th century held these extremely harmful pseudoscientific ideas. It was widely believed, in fact, that while the brains of African Americans were under-evolved, that they were promiscuous in their behavior. And Black men were seen to have an intrinsic perversion for white women. And all African Americans were seen as inherently immoral with insatiable sexual appetites. And so despite these 15,000 missions that these red tails flew, despite the 92nd Infantry, known as the Buffalo Soldiers, to fight against the Nazis in 1944, they were still considered lesser citizens, and in some cases inferior citizens. But there was change coming. After much protest of discrimination in government hiring, and after a protest and march on Washington against this discrimination in the armed services and in the defense industry, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 8802, forbidding racial discrimination in government hiring. But many of these were still a barrier to African Americans at the time. And so they continued to fight. They picketed segregated employment lines outside of wartime manufacturing plants and forced the plants to comply. And in 1943, Roosevelt strengthened Executive Order 8802. And by 1905, the number of jobs held by African Americans had increased to 8% of the industry workforce. But the war raged on, and people sat inside their houses, wondering if it would end. People dedicated their lives to the production of ammunition, firearms, weapons, clothing, and all the sorts that they would need. The 369th Infantry Regiment, which became known as the Harlem Hellfighters, is one of the most known, especially among African Americans. It was an all African American unit. And the Hellfighters were also home to Private Henry Johnson, whom you heard about. Roosevelt described him as one of the 5 bravest Americans who served in the war, who single-handedly fought off more than 20 Germans and saved a fellow soldier from capture, all while injured and armed with only a bolo knife. These courageous actions earned Johnson the nickname Black Death, coming from the German army itself. He was granted France's highest military honor. And after the war, Johnson returned home to a welcoming parade in the native New York City, and would later, posthumously, be awarded the Medal of Honor by President Barack Obama. But at the time, when he returned home from war, and despite the parades, he was still not allowed to use the same buses, drink from the same water fountains, use the same bathrooms, or even to fall in love with a white person. In fact, it was difficult at the time because in many states this was entirely illegal to even have a relationship between a white and a black person. And there are instances where people were caught in the act, where the police broke through their doors to catch them lying in the same bed, where they would then take them, arrest them, prosecute them, and put them in prison. And so maybe there was some fear that that would happen to you and the person you loved who maybe returned from war, or maybe they were lost at war. And to fill that void, or maybe just to feel better, you sought someone else. You sought the companionship of someone. And maybe that person was another race than your own. Maybe they were white or black. Something that you had to keep a secret. Maybe you flirted using winks, using hand gestures, trying to keep it discreet because you knew, oh, did you know, that if somebody found out that you were flirting with somebody of the opposite race, that could be the end right there. You'd heard stories of kids like Emmett Till, who made a pass at a white woman and was subsequently beaten and tossed into the river. So this was dangerous, not just for imprisonment, but for your life. But maybe you found a way to make it work. After all, there were places where interracial marriage was legal. Maybe you went to a different state even to get a marriage certificate. Washington, D.C., for example, was one place where you could go, where they would ratify your interracial marriage. But even then, there could be trouble. And maybe you even heard of the couple, Richard Loving and Mildred Jeter, who were from Virginia. Richard, who was a white man, and Mildred, a woman of mixed African American and Native American ancestry, were longtime friends that had fallen in love. They got married in 1958 in Washington, D.C. to skirt the law in Virginia, which forbade interracial marriage. And they happily got married in Washington, D.C. and returned home to start their new life together. But on July 11th, 1958, just 5 weeks after their wedding, the police broke into the Lovings' home at 2 a.m. and arrested the couple. Mildred and Richard Loving were indicted on charges of violating Virginia's anti-miscegenation law, which deemed interracial marriage a felony. The police even intentionally chose to arrest this couple in the middle of the night so they would be caught in the act, which directly violated the laws of Virginia. The court exiled the couple from Virginia for 25 years, where they were forced to leave friends and family, perhaps their house, maybe even some of their belongings. And this was the 50s, full of protest, racial tension. But in these racial tensions, people did rise to the occasion. Martin Luther King Jr. is one of the most well-known, and Malcolm X, both seeking equality, both seeking a better life for African Americans throughout the United States. And so there would be many contests throughout the 50s on what was and wasn't considered equality based on race. In 1954, Reverend Oliver Brown won the right to send his child to a white school. In the landmark case of Brown versus the Board of Education, the Supreme Court finally ruled that segregation could not be equal. But even then, African American children that were going to white schools, in some cases had to be escorted by armed guard just to keep the mobs around them from killing them, harming them, and who knows what else. In 1955, Rosa Parks would refuse to give up her seat on a bus for a white person, inspiring the Montgomery bus boycott. And there were others that did it before her, protesting the segregation of Jim Crow. In 1957, 9 Black students, armed with military protection, attended a white school in Little Rock, Arkansas. And again, while these may seem minimal in some part of our minds, these were overtly dangerous things to do. The KKK and branches of white supremacy still had footholds throughout the country, especially within the South. But still, progress was being made. And maybe you could even feel the hope returning. Maybe you could feel like your life was just beginning. Just beginning to have the freedom to be, do, and educate yourself in the ways that you want. And in some cases, the ways that you would need just to survive. And these just kept building momentum momentum that would inspire more protests, momentum that would inspire more laws. On August 28, 1963, maybe you joined the March on Washington, standing amongst the crowd of more than 200,000 people marching towards the nation's capital, knowing that Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. would be speaking that day. And even though it was a dreadfully hot day in the humid DC weather, you knew this was going to be a part of history. And maybe you felt pride as you marched down the street. Maybe you even stood next to your partner, an interracial couple, as you marched. And maybe there was hope there as well. Hope that you could live your life without fear of what would happen if the wrong person saw you in an interracial marriage. And maybe there was excitement, feeling excited at what's to come, feeling excited to see Dr. King stand in front of the microphone, one of the most powerful orators in United States history. And then he would give his speech. A speech that wasn't entirely crafted beforehand. And as he stood in front of the microphone, maybe he did hear a voice say, "Tell him about your dream." And he did. I have a dream. And later in 1963, after the March on Washington, the protests began to grow in type and frequency, and a campaign began of restaurant sit-ins, where people of color would march into a restaurant in a crowd and sit down amongst the white people, forcing them to act. And then in 1966, the Black Panther Party would rise to defend the Black people of Oakland, California. And while Malcolm X is fairly controversial at the time, he is a powerful speaker, a motivator. And to him, the Black Panther Party represented the strands of civil rights activism that drew attention to the experiences of racial inequality that occurred in the North and on the West Coast, areas that Dr. King was not reaching. And so he would inspire Black people to take care of other Black people, to form Black schools so that Black kids could be educated, to feed the needy. They would organize together to collect food and give it to those who couldn't afford it. to send kids with lunches to school, to teach them about their ancestry and oppression. And it would have been in 1964 that the Civil Rights Act was passed, outlawing segregation in schools. And for the first time ever, Black and white kids had a chance to learn from each other, to play with each other. And maybe you even had a kid of your own. Maybe you even allowed for a Black kid to come to your house and play. Or maybe you, a white kid. In either case, the community was still at odds with this inclusion. But these kids would begin to break down the stereotypes, break down even the laws, as they begin to see the humanity in the others, as they begin to feel compassion, to empathize with each other's experiences, learn about their walk through the world. And then the Voting Rights Act in 1965 outlawed racial discrimination in voting, which had been wrought for many years through Jim Crow and the Black Codes, and persists even into the future, where gerrymandering and redistricting and creating difficulties in voting was a common method to ensure that Black voters never voted. In fact, part of the plan was to ensure that they couldn't vote by ensuring they had a felony. And so police officers began to become tools to deny Blacks their voting rights. And in some states, nearly 40% or more of the population, especially of African American males, have a felony on their record. And maybe you've seen it, being pulled over for no reason. Maybe you even experienced it yourself. Maybe you just walked down the street on your way to buy ice cream, only to be stopped by a police. And maybe if you raised your voice, you would spend the rest of the day or even a couple weeks in jail. So they taught you how to keep your mouth shut. They taught you how to be nervous around them, because at any moment, your rights could easily be stripped away with one word. And you see these ripples echo throughout the Black communities. The fear, the distrust, never knowing whether the police were there to help you or hurt you. And the Fair Housing Act of 1968 outlawed discrimination in housing. And for the first time in African American history, Blacks began to buy houses, to own something tangible. Because prior to that, they had nothing. Nothing to pass down to their kids. No wealth that would persist. And when they died off, so did any chance of passing on anything other than a name. And even still, it was difficult for Blacks to buy houses because banks would deny loans based on bogus reasons. And different communities would chase Black people out of their area. And in some cases, would return to the flaming cross to spook, to ensure that these Black people living in their community would not stay. And so it was still difficult to own property. And so Blacks continued to migrate, especially out of the South, where these types of discriminatory practices were ubiquitous. And the culture was woven in such a way that things that were Black were bad. In fact, Muhammad Ali, one of the greatest boxers of all time, has also said one of the most profound things on this cultural demonization. And maybe you sat down in front of your TV one day to see this interview. And you could see it in black or white, color TV if you were extremely lucky. And you would see Muhammad Ali stating, "Things are getting much better." But I always wondered when I went to church on Sundays. I've always been one to, I'm not just a boxer. I do a lot of reading, a lot of studying. I ask questions. I'll go out, travel these countries. I'll watch how their people live and learn. And I always asked my mother, I said, "Mama, how come everything is white?" I said, "Why is Jesus white with blonde hair and blue eyes? Why is the Lord's Supper all white men? Angels are white. The Pope, Mary, even the angels," I said. "Mother, when we die, do we go to heaven?" She said, "Naturally, we go to heaven." I said, "Well, what happens to all the Black angels? They took the pictures?" I said, "Oh, I know. If white folks is in heaven too, then the Black angels were in the kitchen, preparing the milk and honey." She said, "Listen, you quit saying that, boy." But I was always curious. And I always wondered why I had to die to go to heaven. Why couldn't I have pretty cars and good money and nice homes now? Why do I have to wait till I die to get milk and honey? And I said, Mama, I don't want no milk and honey. I like steaks. I said, milk and honey is a laxative anyway. Do they have a lot of bathrooms in heaven? So anyway, I was always curious. I always wondered why Tarzan was the king of the jungle in Africa. He was white. I saw this white man swinging around Africa with a diaper on holler. Did you all see Tarzan? And all of the Africans, he's beating them up, breaking the lion's jaw, and here's Tarzan talking to the animals. And the Africans have been there for centuries and they can't talk to animals. Only Tarzan can talk to animals. I always wondered why. And Miss America was always white. All the beautiful brown women in America, beautiful suntans, beautiful shapes, all types of complexions, but she was always white. And Miss World was always white. And Miss Universe was always white. And then they got some stuff called White House cigars, white swan soap, king white soap, white cloud tissue paper, white hair, rain rinse, white tornado floor wax. Everything was white. And the angel fruit cake was the white cake and the devil food cake was the chocolate cake. I said, Mama, why is everything white? I always wondered. And the president lived in the White House, and Mary had a little lamb with feet as white as snow. And then there was Snow White, and everything was white. Santa Claus was white, and everything bad was black. The little ugly duckling was a black duck, and the black cat was bad luck. And if I threaten you, I'm going to blackmail you. I said, Mama, why don't they call it white mail? They lie too. I was always curious, and then this is when I knew something was wrong. I won the Olympic gold medal in Rome, Italy, Olympic champion. The Russians standing right here, and the pole on the other side. And I'm defeating America's so-called threats and enemies, and the flag is going dun, 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 dun. I'm standing so proud. And I'd have whooped the world for America. I took my gold medal, thought I'd invented something. I said, man, I know what I'm going to do to give my people freedom. I'm the champion of the whole world, Olympic champion. I know I can eat downtown now. And I went downtown that day, had my big gold medal on. I went in a restaurant, and at that time, things weren't integrated. Black folks couldn't eat downtown. And I went downtown, I sat down, and I said, cup of coffee and a hot dog. The lady said, we don't serve Negroes. I was so mad. I said, I don't eat them either. Just give me a cup of coffee and a hamburger. You know, I said, I'm the Olympic gold medal winner. I won 3 days. I fought for this country in Rome. I won the gold medal and I'm going to eat. And I heard her tell the manager and he said, well, he's got to go out. And they put me out. And I had to leave that restaurant in my hometown where I went to church to serve in their Christianity. My daddy fought in all the wars. I just won the gold medal and I couldn't eat downtown. I said, something's wrong. And from then on, I've been a Muslim. The truth attracted me to Islam. The teachings of Elijah Muhammad on how black people have been brainwashed, how they've been taught to love white and hate black, how we've been robbed of our names in slavery. We were robbed of our culture. We were robbed of our true history. So it left us walking around a dead man. So you got black people in an all-white country, and they don't know nothing about themselves. They don't speak their language. They're just mentally dead. And this is happening all over the world. The first place that will rise will be the black people of America, and then the rest of them will. I was the one who heard the truth. And when I heard the truth about my name was not Cassius Clay. Like I knew a black man in America named John Hawkins. Now you know who John Hawkins was. He was a slave trader from England. But the white people of that time, if one had 5 slaves and his name was Jones, they would all be called Jones property. If you was auctioned off to Mr. Smith, your name was Smith, identifying you as the property of certain masters. So when I heard that we don't have our names, We don't speak our true Arabic language. We were robbed of Islam, our true religion, and we've been made deaf, dumb, and blind in slavery. And when I heard it, I've been free ever since. I have no racial problems. I don't go where I'm not wanted. And so, as you watch the interview, maybe it sparked something. Maybe it sparked a thought. Maybe it sparked a desire. Maybe you felt good, or maybe you felt bad. Maybe you found something, or maybe you lost something else. Were you really free? Was your partner really free? Did either of you actually have freedom? Did your kids have freedom? Did your neighbors? Because for a lot of people, it didn't feel like freedom. On August 11th, 1965, Marquette Frye, a young African-American motorist, was pulled over and arrested by a white California highway patrolman for suspicion of driving intoxicated. As a crowd of onlookers gathered at the scene of Frye's arrest, tensions became strained between police officers and the crowd, and it erupted in a violent exchange. The outbreak violence that followed Frye's arrest immediately touched off a large-scale riot centered in the commercial section of Watts, a deeply impoverished African-American neighborhood in South Central LA. And for several days, rioters overturned and burned automobiles, looted and damaged property and grocery stores. And over the course of the 6-day riot, over 14,000 National Guard were mobilized to South LA. And a curfew zone encompassing a 45-mile radius was created in an attempt to restore order. This riot claimed the lives of 34 people and resulted in more than 1,000 injuries and almost 4,000 arrests before order was restored on August 17th. And Governor Pat Brown launched an investigation into what actually happened and found that the riot was a result of the Watts community's long-standing grievances and growing discontentment with high unemployment rates, substandard housing, and inadequate schools. Were they free? Despite the reported findings, city leaders and state officials failed to implement any new measures to improve the social and economic conditions of African Americans living in the Watts neighborhood. And then, in 1972, the Associated Press reported on a scientific study by the United States government involving 600 Black men, 400 with syphilis and 200 without. The study was meant to investigate how syphilis worked, how it spread in the communities. And anybody in the study was given free medical care for bad blood, a colloquial term encompassing anemia, syphilis, fatigue, and other conditions. In exchange, they received a small amount of compensation, such as free meals and burial insurance. The study began in 1932. And 15 years later, penicillin became known to treat syphilis. But the researchers didn't inform the people in their study. And in fact, they went out of their way to ensure they didn't find out. The researchers provided doctors in Macon County with lists of their subjects and asked them not to treat them. And in 1940, they did the same with the Alabama Health Department on November 16, 1972. The Tuskegee Experiment finally ended. By this time, only 74 of the test subjects were still alive. 128 people had died of syphilis or its complications. 40 of them had infected their wives, and 19 of their children acquired congenital syphilis. And they purposefully kept it under wraps, simply to see what would happen if someone went untreated. And tensions began to rise. And the invention of video cameras, of handheld video cameras, became more common. And in 1992, Rodney King was pulled over for a DUI. And unbeknownst to the police doing the beating, they were filmed on this hand camera. As a result of the incident, King was hospitalized for a fractured skull, broken leg, and burn marks from the tasers that they shot across his body. The video aired on CNN the next day, and the cops were put on trial. But the trial was moved out of Los Angeles to the largely white suburb of Simi Valley, after the judge ruled that untainted jurors could not be found in Los Angeles. The police officers were tried for their use of excessive force in state court in 1992 and acquitted on April 29th that year. Later that same day, the 1992 Los Angeles riots began. And at that time, in state police departments, 87% of sworn employees were white. And so we can see how difficult it is to feel free. In a country where freedom, in many cases, has been an illusion. And maybe you've realized that your freedom has a lot more contingencies and loopholes and rules than it had been before. And maybe you even begin to understand how deeply rooted these values, these ideas, these thoughts truly are. So right now, everyone just take a nice, deep breath. Feel your lungs, feel them expand, then hold it at the top for just a moment. And as you exhale, just let yourself feel relaxed. And begin to work your way down from the top of your head, feeling all the muscles relaxing as you move down the arms to the tips of the fingers, then allowing all the muscles in the core and your chest to just kind of relax, allowing any tension in the legs to let go, letting all the muscles become softer, and then just allow yourself a moment to just breathe comfortably. And a lot happened, but maybe right now you just need to let go and find a nice, comfortable breath. And with each exhale, just allow yourself to feel more comfortable. And when you all are ready, you can open your eyes, sit up, and I wish you all a good night. And I'll leave you with this. I have learned over the years that when one's mind is made up, this diminishes fear. Knowing what must be done does away with fear. Rosa Parks. So I know that one was a little heavier than the previous ones, and there was a lot to cover, but I hope it was relaxing and evocative as well. It maybe made you think outside of the confines of your mind in 2020. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Have a wonderful evening.